My name's Catherine Isbister. I'm a professor of computational media at the University of California, Santa Cruz. And I'm on stage with Mia Consalvo from Concordia University and Eric Zimmerman, who's at NYU at the Games Center. So the premise of today's panel, so I tried to include cultural references for multiple generations. How many people get the one with the gopher? And how many people get the one with the lady? Okay, all right, cool. So I did it. I feel like everybody raised their hands. So the idea is, you know, if you've been around, you've helped build one game program, then you go on to build another one, or maybe even several, you end up being able to triangulate, being able to compare notes. You're like a living, breathing example of the differences and the similarities between what it's like to work in different contexts. So I thought it could be really useful to this audience to hear about that and maybe even have a kind of, you know, cathartic discussion about what it's like to move between places, right? So I gathered some impressive credentials here with this panel. All told, I think we have been at these schools, plus I couldn't even fit all the schools that Eric has done some adjunct teaching for. So this isn't even a complete set of logos here. And among us, we have more than 50 years experience teaching game design and development, okay? So we've been doing this for a while, and in really different places. So we've taught at art schools, we've taught at engineering schools. Some of us have worked on MFA programs, which are more, you know, artist-focused and terminal degree for teaching focused in the arts side. Others of us have worked in engineering contexts or both. And we've helped to formulate programs at all levels of student bodies. We've also had experience internationally. Mia is in Canada. I've worked in Denmark and other countries. And I know Eric has done some advising on curricula in other countries. So not just even North America, but other contexts too. Okay, so that's kind of our, you know, overall credentials. So the format of this panel, though, is first I asked each person to just give you like a kind of brief summary of where they've been, where they've taught, so that you have a sense of each of us and our own context, where we're coming from when we speak about what we're doing. And then we've got a few questions that we use to seed the discussion among us, to get the conversation going. And at any point, we're glad to have questions from you all in the audience, of course. So feel free to jump up to the mic and ask a question during any phase of this panel, of course. And then what we also did was we decided to collect some questions ahead of time using Facebook and Twitter. So I gathered some questions from people, sometimes people who won't actually be able to attend the conference, that could additionally help seed the conversation. And we sort of formulated it as, you know, what questions would you like advice about from this panel live? So again, feel free to jump in. If you have a burning question that you want the panel to answer, jump in at any time. Okay, is everybody clear on the format of what we're going to do today? Okay, great. So we're going to start with Mia, who's going to give us a quick overview of where she's been and where she is now.
Thanks, Catherine. Thank you all for coming this morning. So I got my PhD in 1999 from the University of Iowa, and my first job was at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, which felt kind of like the university was like the inferior cousin to Wisconsin-Madison. Just context is important to know, and that'll probably be a theme like as we go through all of this. But I was in a mass comm department there, and I actually started studying games there. And one of my first students is actually leading the session on the Narrative Innovation Showcase in the next room, Matt Wise. So partly where I've come from is, I tell everybody, all Matt's fault. And he was an awesome student, and we ended up actually, because Matt had taken a bunch of courses that he thought were super interesting, and he was very smart, but he had nothing towards an actual degree, because he just took courses that were interesting to him. And so we actually put together a course of study for him, and this eventually became a certificate program in digital arts and culture, which spanned different departments and different colleges across the university. And I was one of the people helping to build that, which meant going to talk to different faculty, you know, that I didn't know and saying, hey, would you be interested in having your course listed as part of this, you know, certificate program? And games were a part of the DAC certificate. I was there for 3 years, and then I jumped to Ohio University, where I was for about 7, and I was in a school of, it was called telecommunications, and then it became media arts, media arts, the media school, and we started an undergraduate concentration in games and animation. And I had something to do with that because I was speaking at GDC, and a lot of the faculty said, hey, that looks really interesting, and they all came to GDC with me, and suddenly we said, hey, like, this is really cool, and we should build this concentration. And so I was involved with that. I jumped to MIT when Gambit was part of the Comparative Media Studies program, which was a very different context. Here, there was no real games degree at the time, but there was a concentration, a certain number of classes in games, and there was the summer program bringing over students from Singapore and working on games that had a research component. And from there, I moved to Concordia, where I still am, and Concordia is an interesting place because there's a lot of people doing games, but we're spread out across the university. So there's no games department. I'm in communication studies now. I am, once again, the games person, the one person in the department doing that, but there are a whole ton of people that gather together as part of a research center that build and study games. And I'll stop there.
And I guess Mia's modest because she didn't mention she has this really prestigious Canadian chairship at Concordia, which shows that games have risen gradually but inexorably in stature in the academic world.
Is the chair made out of like swords?
Yeah, it's like basically it's like in the Game of Thrones. It's like Anyway. Cool. So I will give you a little bit about my own trajectory. So I actually started teaching about games as an adjunct professor at Stanford University. So I had done my dissertation loosely related to games and characters and had started working on a book called Better Game Characters by Design. And a really great colleague of mine said, you know what will make your book better is teach the material while you're developing it. So I talked to professors that I'd known when I got my PhD there. They said, sure, we'd be glad to have you teach a course on this. And I taught it for a couple of years, which was a fantastic experience. Then at some point I decided I was ready to be a full-time academic again. And I got a position at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, which is in upstate New York. And I landed there in 2004, which was right about when they were contemplating starting an undergraduate games degree. So as a relatively junior faculty member, I got thrown into a mix of current faculty, including some very senior faculty who were kind of percolating and ruminating on how they wanted to grow this program, and I got to be a part of that development of that degree, among other things. Then I had a brief stint at the IT University in Copenhagen, and at the time I was there, and this is still the case, there was a really terrific group of game research scholars. They didn't have an undergrad program, they had a master's, and it was in this sort of technical school. So I went from working on an undergraduate degree to coming in on an in-progress master's degree and learning how to work with the student body in a different country and how to teach there. Then I was at NYU for about 6 years, and I had an interesting journey at NYU. When I first arrived, I was wholly in the School of Engineering in a kind of digital media department, and as Mia was describing, I was kind of the only games person in that group. But there was this interesting Skunkworks project going on at the time that was happening out of the Tisch School of the Arts, which was calling itself the Game Center. And this was a group of people who were trying to gather all the different courses that were being taught around NYU, provide a list to students, start providing resources and places to make games, and we're really thinking well about how to grow all things games at NYU. So of course I started hanging around with them because that was super exciting. And in the end, that resulted in me switching part of my departmental appointment over into what then became a department, which is now the Game Center. And that was a fantastic ride. I got to help as they created the MFA program there, which was the first program that was launched. And then also I was a part of the planning for the undergraduate program. Meanwhile, the other part of my joint appointment was in computer science. I got moved over to computer science, and with my colleagues there, built out this game lab and also helped form a concentration, not a minor, but a concentration for engineers. So kind of had to wear two hats there. And then since 2015, I've been at University of California, Santa Cruz. Now, it's interesting, I feel like I've been part of all these like bubbling, nascent, shifting contexts, because Literally the year before I got to UC Santa Cruz, a kind of rogue group of computer scientists broke off and started their own department of computational media. So it's still in the School of Engineering, but it's its own little place. And I arrived, and they did that on the merits of having a really big undergrad game degree. I think it got bigger than the actual CS undergrad game degree. So they broke off, formed their own department, and I joined in, and I was one of the first cohort of faculty joining this new thing. So I've watched this department shape up, and I've been a part of that undergrad program. We also have a professional master's in game development over in Silicon Valley. Actually, we have like an extension campus over there. And then I've also watched the arts division at UC Santa Cruz grow. We have some fantastic faculty on the arts side, and then we built an interwoven undergrad degree between arts and engineering where they actually do their capstone projects together. So I would say now I'm in a really big ecosystem of a lot of people doing game production and also game scholarship, which is a really happy place to be. And now time for Eric.
Hey everybody, welcome to GDC. It's nice to be back. I was gone for a couple of years after coming to this conference for a long time, so really happy to be here. What's that?
I didn't advance the slide.
Oh, you didn't advance the slide? I could pretend to be you.
I know you could.
My name is Catherine Isbister. I am really happy to be back, and thanks, Catherine, for putting together this panel. So I have a different background. I worked in the game industry for about 25 years, and I still work in the game industry. So I was never trained in a scholarly discipline. I have a BFA in painting and an MFA in art and technology, although I'm not really a technologist. But that background in the arts really, I think, gives me more of a cultural orientation to what I do as a game designer and what I do as a teacher, and those experiences of teaching in art schools, I think, still continue to really inform my idea of what it means to be an academic. And I was taught painting by students of Joseph Albers from the Yale School, which, if that means anything to you, Joseph Albers wrote Interaction of Color, which probably had the book that had the single biggest impact on art school education in the United States. And that kind of formalist, modernist, academic training in painting was wildly contrasted by my art history courses and courses in feminist theory and post-structuralist theory while I was an undergraduate. And that kind of clash between wanting to teach the craft of a discipline and wanting to situate something within kind of contemporary cultural debate is still stuff that we argue about at the NYU Game Center, and that again informs what we're talking about today, building programs for me as an instructor. When I finished graduate school, I started teaching pretty much immediately at Interactive Telecommunications program with Frank Lantz, and we were the game class within a larger curriculum. And teaching that class really helped show me what a discipline was as game design. I was sort of exploring that discipline. Katie Salen and I were working on rules of play during that time. So for me, teaching was a way of doing research and trying to figure out what a game was, how they worked, how we could define them, by trying to structure things into a course that really informed me. At the same time, I was running a studio game lab in New York City that ran to about 30 people. And my experience as a game designer encompasses video games, also tabletop games, and also weird experiments like museum installations I do with architect Nathalie Pozzi. So, and all of that stuff has come back into my teaching. During this time, I was adjuncting here and there. I was helping people design curricula, and also ended up about 8 years ago becoming a full-time instructor at the NYU Game Center around the time, maybe a little after you joined, or I was a consultant there first around the time you came in, and then but I eventually came on full-time, and that's what I've been doing for a while I'm still a working designer. I guess the only other thing I want to say is that for me, designing a program is very much a design problem. And I think about it the way that we design games. So with a game, we design structures of rules, we create a situation, we build something that's encountered by people. And what bubbles up out of that situation, this sort of emergent play, emotional experience, storytelling that happens, this is social interaction, that's a kind of emergent effect that kind of bubbles out of those structures that we construct. And that's the way I think about the classes that I do, and also the program that we have now at NYU, and helping other people think about their programs, that you create structures and situations and the classes that happen, the projects that happen, the communities that kind of cluster around these departments and programs are the emergent effect. So I'm sure we're going to get more into detail today. And the last thing I want to say, I apologize, I didn't tell you I was going to do this, Catherine, but I just want to take 20 seconds to say, did anyone participate in the global strike for climate change last week on Friday? Did anyone? Good. Well, I just want to say, I just wanted to plug that and plug the idea that as academics, we need to be really engaged with the world around us, and there are lots of big things and small things that we can do as educators. So just, sorry for that little intervention, but anyway, I encourage you all to take a closer look at that.
Fantastic. All right, so like I said, we have these seed questions, and actually the first question is a really good seed follow-up to what Eric was just talking about, and the ways that he thinks about shaping curriculum. And I think this is a great springboard for all of us because we've come from different places and started things and worked with things at different phases. So first question is, what's it like to shape a curriculum for a new place when you've already done it somewhere else? And maybe I'll have Eric start. We've got your slides at the end if you want to.
Sure. I've come into a few different programs as a consultant, I guess. So maybe I'll talk about that experience. Yeah. I think that there's a few things when you're first starting out with a program. Maybe you're part of a group. I think the most important thing is that is to really get buy-in from everybody that might be involved, and to get as large a group of people thinking about it as possible. I think that that this is just kind of institutional politics, but when I've been brought in, some small group brings me in, and I keep on saying, but who's their boss, and who's their boss, and who they report to, and I say, can we invite them, can we invite those people in? And I design a kind of a workshop where everybody can come in and air their thoughts and ideas and grievances, and I encourage people to push back. I encourage people to raise their skepticisms about games. We don't get that as much anymore, but certainly when I started doing this 20 years ago, games were a really dirty word, and we we would talk about them and debate them. So, just to say that there's different, some of the exercises that I would do that I found useful are, we would craft a mission statement. So I would have people do things like, write down a list of words of good experiences that you've had playing games, or just emotional experiences that you've had playing games. Mm-hmm. Write down a list of words, small list, like 3 to 5 words that you would hope for this program. What's the experience of a student in the program? What's the what are some outcomes of the program or pedagogical goals? Then we have this big list of words, and then groups take words and they have to do a mission statement, just incorporating those words, right? And so does that become the final mission statement of the program? Usually not, but people have a sense of like, it's just a way to kind of artificially create some collaboration. There's nothing that's not artificial, so artificial is not a negative word, but to create some collaboration and create a sense of ownership, and to have people together working on something. So you're starting to create that familial feeling. It's really important to say, like, what is the special sauce of this program? One game program can't be everything to all people. So to really have a very clear, pointed, this is the thing that's going to make us distinct. And now there's game programs everywhere. So you really need to have that kind of defining idea. And lastly, I would say that for curriculum design, for me, nothing beats a bunch of index cards on a table and really talking about what are they taking, different colored index cards representing their electives or other requirements in the program, out of the program, major classes, non-major classes, or technical versus visual versus design, or scholarly versus practice, whatever it is, and like move things around and talk about them and really iterate on that. And that usually takes a few sessions to start going. So those are a few best practices.
Fantastic. Do you want to add anything, Mia?
Sure. Well, I've never been in a situation where I went to a university and somebody said, here's $50 million and you've got 10 faculty lines and we're going to build you this great space and you've got all this time and do whatever you want, right? Like, usually you're looking around the people in your department with an eye, or maybe, across a college thinking, how can I build something? Like, what's it going to look like? Because like at Ohio, it was very clearly going to be a sequence within our larger major. It couldn't be its own breakaway major. It also had to fit at the time within like a quarter system. And then there was a horrible upset when the university switched to semester systems and what that meant. But these are all things that are going to shape, like Eric's saying, there's no cookie cutter games program, but it's who are the faculty that you have that want to participate, and that's also going to shape maybe what your specialty is, because and also a lot of universities that I've seen give you the stink eye, and they're like, is this going to be revenue neutral? Or are you just going to bring in students? Is this going to cost us money? And maybe you can say if we bring in so many more students, we'll get a couple of faculty down the line, but it's really rare to get those faculty up front. So you really have to figure out how you're going to do whatever it is with what you've got right now.
Yeah.
Right. And I would say that you want to make those things that might seem like weaknesses, you make them into a strength. So if you say, well, half of our faculty are going to come from the dance department, and what are they going to have to say about games? You would be like, oh my God, that's amazing. We'll be the only department in the world teaching about physical movement and games and play and dance. So, whatever you think might be weird about your situation could be the roots to what makes you really special.
And to chime in on that, something that hasn't come up yet is the student body. And it's been my experience, moving between the contexts I did, there were incredible differences in the strengths students brought, their preparation, but also their kind of sociocultural positioning and their dreams and ambitions, where they wanted to be when they were done. And I think that's another really interesting place to draw inspiration curriculum-wise, because then if you couple, what the faculty is good at and what the students are really hoping to do, you're most likely to play to the strengths of the whole institution. So I would say, do a really clear and sort of soul-searching, investigation of what are our students really like, what do they really want out of this, and how can we actually deliver that for them? Yeah. Yeah.
Can I say one other thing? When you're starting a program, and actually, I think this is true for every department in every university around the world, but it's especially true of games. You need to establish at the very beginning, at the very, very first meeting, an open-ended idea of what constitutes proper research. Because I think that in an interdisciplinary field like we have, but people often get trapped and they're making games, or they're doing maybe journalistic work, or they're not, in other words, it's so radically interdisciplinary. Some people will be doing traditional scholarly work. I have never once written a peer-reviewed paper or done any of that kind of white paper type of academic work. It's so important that if you are wanting to hire people that are coming from the industry, for example, the game industry, or if you are looking to hire people from across fields, that I think that needs to be in the DNA of your program. And if anybody pushes back, you just have to say, look, we're in the 21st century now. We can't, I know that there are huge institutional structures at universities, but these are things that are definitely going to crumble. All these vanity presses that are making academics spend money to publish books that no one's going to read because there's this idea of what proper scholarship is. And I'm not thinking of anyone in particular. I'm just saying that people need to be able to pursue their passions at a university. So I feel so strongly about this that I think it's worth really pushing back hard, but at the very beginning.
Yeah, and other programs have dealt with this over the years too, as you're saying. It's not just games. When we were in TCOM, in the media school, we had people who made documentaries, and that's how they got tenure. Right, and so it was never an issue in terms of creative output was valued. That was considered a part of research. So I think also realizing that other departments and disciplines have fought these fights as well, and universities have accepted that. At least some universities have.
So there are a lot of fellow long-term academic veterans in the audience. I can see some of them. If at any point you want to chime in on this, just go to the mic. Do not hesitate. Because the spirit of this panel is really to help those who are newer into the profession to learn as rapidly as possible as they can from us. So don't be shy. Yeah, please do. Yay! I liberated Rich to say something. Yay!
Good morning, everyone. Thank you already. This is really terrific and interesting. Following up on what Eric and Mia were just saying, I bet there are many people in this room who do have a mixed creative and academic background. What are some specific resources for people like me? I asked this question in a self-interested way, who would like to, Mia, engage, to seek out resources so that I know how to write, how to present the creative work I've done as research in a way that will be useful and accepted. Are there particularly journals we should speak to?
So one thing on a meta level is that HEVGA, the Higher Education Video Games Alliance, under the excellent guidance of Andy Phelps, who's sitting right behind Rich, has been working on developing a sort of tenure guidelines set of practices that are around this. So like one thing is, I think, and I know like at UC Santa Cruz, in our department, Indiecade and other, highly, selective peer-reviewed venues for games are considered on par with things like writing a book. So one thing we can do is, as a department, we can make clear our tenure standards or our promotion standards, and then the chair is responsible for sending that message higher to the tenure committee, to the dean, et cetera, right? We can do that work. And so HEVGA is trying to create an umbrella around that where we have some guidance that the deans and the tenure committees can read, right? So one of the communities I'm in is computer science, and for a long time now, conference papers have been the coin of the realm in computer science, but a lot of tenure committees think journal articles are really more important. So actually, there was a group of computer science chairs, like an association, that issued a memorandum about this, and once that happened, that went out to all the deans, and a lot of the issues that CS faculty were having with getting tenured went away, because you could just put this letter into the file as it went up. So that's one thing we're kind of doing at a field level that should be helpful. That's not really helping you, figure out how to write about your practice. So. Yeah. We can. All right. So this should be a fun one, and feel also free to share your trauma or war stories again, experienced faculty. What's something unexpected that happened when you moved between programs? Anybody want to jump in?
Well, I don't know if this is answering it exactly, but I think there's a big difference between being the game person or the game class in a larger department and having the luxury to design a whole curriculum where you're really can focus a lot on games or on digital media or whatever the program might be. So I think there's pitfalls in both sides. I think there's pluses and minuses. I think that looking at NYU, we often, I think, are a little too conservatory in our approach, that it becomes a walled garden where students really are taking mostly classes in our department, and they're not going outside, which is a horrible thing for game designers and people that want to work in the game industry, that they're not getting more influence from culture outside of games. So there's pluses and minuses, I think, on both sides of that equation.
Makes sense.
I would say every time I move, I don't know what I don't know. Because by definition, you're just, I posted something on Jillian's Facebook about this. When I moved to Concordia, I inadvertently made a staff person feel terrible. I basically bullied this person into buying me a stapler, because at every university I'd been at, office supplies were something that the department purchased. There was a cabinet, you went and got your pens and your stapler and your Post-it notes, right? And that was, and I mean, people would complain if you took 12 reams of paper, but that was about it. And I didn't realize at Concordia that you get a startup fund and you have to buy everything on your own stapler, your own pens, because you got this money to do it. I didn't know this, and I just kept saying, I need a stapler, and she looked increasingly uncomfortable, and I think it's because it was Canada too, and she was too nice to tell me, buy your own damn stapler, Mia, you've got a CRC, you can afford it, it's like a $6 stapler. And then finally, I don't know if I figured it out or somebody told me, and I felt horrible, but,
Mia, this sounds like the pilot in your new sitcom.
So just to say, and also be prepared to apologize later on for these things that will potentially happen to you, because yeah, how would you know? There was no manual saying, you must buy your own stapler.
Yeah, and I would just second that, especially if you're moving into an international context that's unfamiliar to you. So I had a rather hilarious snafu like that at IT University Copenhagen. I was teaching this game studio class, and I handed out my syllabus, and it said attendance is mandatory. Because, I run a discussion class, and we give each other peer feedback. So one of the students, well, they're all kind of looking over the syllabus, and one of them says, "You can't do this, that's illegal." I was like, "What?" And I started laughing. I was like, and they were all, "Yes, that is illegal." So I was like, "Okay, let me get back to you on this." And I went to the department chair and I said, "The students are telling me it's illegal to require attendance." And he said, "Oh, yes, that is very much the case." And I said, "I don't understand." And he said, "Well, in Denmark, we have examinations at the end of each course, and you and an external examiner examine the student on the material in the course. Technically, they can just not show up for anything, and if they pass the exam, they have demonstrated mastery of the material. So they don't need to come to your class." And I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do? Because everything relied on these group exercises and peer feedback. So basically, I went back the next session, and I made a kind of pleading pitch to the students. I was like, "Okay, you're right. It's illegal. I'm sorry. I'm taking it off the syllabus, but let me clarify why you should show up." And they did. They actually showed up for the classes. So in the end, it wasn't an issue, but it would have never in my wildest dreams have occurred to me that I would have been violating the law with something on my syllabus. So especially if you're feeling adventurous, you've only taught in the States, and you're like, "Oh, I want to go teach in, country X." Go sit down with your chair, ask for some sample syllabi. If you see things that are missing, maybe, ask some questions about
Yeah, that reminds me. I just gave some intensive game design sessions in China at Tencent, the gigantic company. And part of the process that they had set up was that I interviewed people that would be participating. So this wasn't an academic context, but I was giving them a lot of the same stuff that we give our students. And that interview process was mind-blowing and eye-opening. And you realize what you're flying into a place where the expectations are completely the opposite of how, for example, I might teach game design. Yeah. So that kind of research, I think, and I think we need to put on our research hats in a sense, right?
Well, and to your point, I don't know about you all, but we have an increasing number of foreign students in our programs. So even at the student level, they may have very different expectations for how courses are going to go than students who are in the US. Like another thing that I had to adjust to in Denmark was the students did not feel free to ask questions and engage in boisterous conversation in class, and I had to set a local kind of culture for that. So, yeah. All right.
Catherine, let me know when you want me to go to the other slides that I put together.
Yeah, whatever you like. I thought the first question would have been. But why don't we use this one? So, noticeable differences. What are some examples of ways that places you've worked with were different, and how did this impact how you worked? Is it at all relevant?
It's close enough.
Okay,
I can jump up there.
Eric has some really cool slides we want you to see.
Catherine, now I'm gonna pop. Oh, it's going as quickly as possible. Okay, sorry, they're at the end, right?
Yeah.
And I'm hitting as fast as I can. Sorry, it's.
We're soon gonna hear that ding, 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 ding.
Okay, all right, so, and of course now it's recorded all of my, and you're also getting a preview of my, whoops, that's all the time we have today. All right, and now I bet I backed up too far. No, one more. Okay, so I put together some slides because I thought that it would be really useful to just talk about tools that I use that are documents and visualizations of programs. So this is actually the very, very first. I found it in my notes from something like 2002. Would it have been that long ago? I think something like, no, maybe a little bit. No, would have been later, 2012. Yeah, I was off by only 10 years. So I think it was Catherine and Jesper Juhl and Frank Lantz and I were leading this group at NYU when Jesper was teaching there. And so we had the brainstorming session. We talked about, we had the index cards on the table, and we came up with this, and this was our first pass at the MFA program. I would say that this is probably still about 75% or maybe 60%. What do you think, Naomi? it's fairly close to what we have. We don't have anything called playtime. I had to go back and say, oh my gosh, that sounded like a really interesting idea. That didn't end up being part of the curriculum. But just to show what we did, so we wrote down, what these documents were. What these classes were. And we also did some, what in design you would call like a user scenario. So we just took 3 different students and we said like, hey, what are the kinds of students that we would want to have in our program? And how would they, like, would our curriculum suit them? And so would these, how would they go through our program? And I think what's interesting about these kinds of documents is that they become ways for everybody involved to kind of know what's going on. They also become ways to recruit students so that at a glance, a potential student can look at a program. They become ways of explaining to the administration what you're doing. They're incredibly useful. Now I just want to jump forward to some newer documents. This is our current MFA curriculum, although I'm in the process of revising it. It's not going to look anything like this, but just to show you, happens to be very colorful. It's showing you, in this case, all of our different MFA classes grouped by discipline area, and also this program, which kind of shows you at a glance the way MFAs move through the program, what they do each year. So this doesn't list all of our classes, but it sort of shows you what are required courses, what are elective courses. And these are also really good for advising as well. So for me, the creation of these tools and updating them as you work on a curriculum have been incredibly important. And just like everything else in design, it's not that you figure it out and then you visualize it. In visualizing it, you also are designing it. In trying to put it together and trying to conceptualize it in a way that makes sense, that is also a way of figuring out what it is. I think maybe I can just click on a slide. I'm now realizing we didn't need to go through all this. Where were we on was this it? Okay, so anyway, I just wanted to share those, and I'm happy to share any of our documents at the Game Center with anybody.
And just a second, what Eric said, it gets even more complicated. Like now that I'm at UCSC, because we have these articulated undergrad programs, and then because we have graduate, we have like a MS in computational media, but the professional masters in game development, students are moving between these worlds to take electives. You can get to the point where you're needing to create what we call CLP there, but visualizing that can be an extremely helpful way for faculty who have meetings about how to coordinate all this stuff to make sure that it makes sense, right? Yeah.
I'll just add in terms of different contexts also, the university that you're at or that you're moving to can be different in different ways. So with Milwaukee, we had a lot of first-generation college students, and we also had a lot of returning adult students, or either, they had gone to college when they were 18, some of them had flunked out, and then worked for a while and then were coming back, or they never went and they were suddenly, coming back and they were in their, late 20s or 30s even. They might have still been working full-time, but it was an interesting cohort because these were mostly students who were really focused on getting their degree, but they might not have had the strong educational grounding that, for example, like the students at MIT had, right? Yeah. And so they're very motivated, but there might not have been as many of the prior skills to build on. MIT was obviously very different in that regard. But then also at Concordia, the people who make games, there's an undergrad major in computer science that's very much, a very computer science-y focus. But then at the graduate level for MAs and PhDs, there are independent programs, and some of the students who come through my department who are not interested in working in the commercial game industry really at all. They want to make art games. They might want to, open their own studio, but it's really about, either their personal vision or innovating in the form. And, I think also the points people have made are true, thinking about who your students are. You can try and course correct, I think, maybe away from some certain, but it's going to be really hard. If you've already got a certain set of expectations among students about the kinds of things that they want, or if you've changed, your type of student, it would be interesting to hear from either of you of how did you shift, the culture of the program or the focus of it.
So one example I have that's still a work in progress is that when we started our professional master's program at Santa Cruz, so that the UC system kind of has two economic models, and one is like these self-sustaining programs that are typically more expensive, and the other is programs that get folded into the overall apparatus of the university sort of pay scheme. And so we just switched the economics of that program from the standalone to the kind that's folded into the university, which substantially reduced the cost. And so that's one thing we haven't talked about yet, which is the cost for students, which of course impacts, how they feel about getting the degree, what they think they need to do after, what you, in good conscience, try to tell them about what they need to do after, right? And I think that's something to always keep in mind. I mean, interestingly, in Denmark, everybody was paid for the most part. So there was a big emphasis on completion, because the schools only got the government funding when the person was handed the degree. So it created some strange incentive structures around getting people through the program that I would not have expected. So I think economics is worthwhile difference to consider.
I mean, that's a big discussion. The cost of an American education is perverse, I would say. I mean, especially the school where I teach might be the most expensive university in the world by some measures. So, and the School of the Arts is the most expensive school at NYU because we have more expensive facilities and things like that. So we have to add on extra costs.
Yeah, the lab
so
fees.
I don't know what to say. This goes way beyond game programs, right?
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
it's
Yeah.
a huge topic for, but it's different in different parts of the world as well.
All right.
Also, how many of you are in the process of building a new program, building out your program, facing some of the things? Okay, so we only have 20 minutes left. It worries me that no one's at the mic. I would feel much better if there was like a line of people there and people were, right? Do you agree, Catherine?
Yes,
I
totally
would rather be
Go
useful
for it.
to you.
Go for it.
Okay,
All
great.
right, so I have a couple of questions. So I'm at the University of Tulsa, Oklahoma. So we started our program. I was brought in to start this program because I came from the community college where I had a program for like 5 years, and then they brought me in to do this program. But I'm facing the same problems, is that I'm in computer science. I'm developing a design program, game design, because that's my background. I'm not on the programming side. But I'm having a lot of pushback from the art department, who doesn't do a lot of technical, and they see that there's a benefit for us having this program. They're getting an undergraduate minor in art already, but they're not really cooperating and helping us build the program. So have you had any experiences?
I have one good tip for that.
Okay.
It's really strategic to form a board of advisors to back you up. And you can select people for that board of advisors who credential well for each of the sets of constituencies on your campus. So you can pick somebody with a CS background who's a muckety A. You can pick somebody with an arts background who has highly regarded, indie games. And people really, you'd be surprised, they do want to give back, and they're glad to give you a little lightweight advice. But what's better about that is you now have the thud weight of these people making advisements to you about what you already wanted to do, and if you can maybe convince your college to give you a little slush fund to bring them in once a year, then all those, faculty meet with them and are like, whoa, oh, I had no idea, and suddenly things go much easier. So that's one tip.
I would just say also, remember that you don't have to reinvent what other departments are doing, so that your program, maybe the only things that you need to invent are those things that are really unique to you, and that you can have your students taking computer science courses, taking visual art courses, so that it feels less like you're encroaching on their turf, and it feels more like you are kind of adding to them and wanting to incorporate the cool stuff they're already doing.
And I would add too that, universities are getting more competitive within programs, and so it's an honest fear, and I've seen at Concordia where if you say, let's hire a person to do games and learning, and we'll hire the best person we can, and they could be in any one of 4 departments, and maybe one of the 4 departments, the person you think is best, is saying we already have a games person, and even though that person is great, it's like they're saying our curriculum is moving away from what we designed our curriculum to be, or they're saying things like, the university will remember that we got this hire, and so when we need the next hire to teach something within our department, they won't give us a line, which is honestly a really valid fear and has happened. So, I'm the downer here, but I would say like really honestly listen to, like what are their concerns, like multiple times to see, and sometimes the pushback that you get, you may not be able to push back, against, or maybe you go adjacent, like what Eric is saying.
Oh, hi. So I had a question around student recruitment and planning around student recruitment. So a couple of things. One, it seems like a lot of your guys' programs, when you generate them sort of internally from all these different departments, does that mean your target group is kids that are already at the universities? And how do you transition to attracting people to come to your school because of the program you created? But also, what are some like explicit strategies for building inclusivity in your program and generating a program that kind of attracts all learners to it, instead of the kind of making people maybe feel not like it's not for them, if that makes sense?
I'll jump on the inclusivity part first. One thing that I've been doing recently, and this goes across all courses I teach, not just like games courses, is I'm becoming more explicit with the students about things like the syllabus, and saying, here are the readings that we're doing. And like I tried to really, every year I kind of try and gender rebalance, to make sure that there's more and more of a balance. I'm looking at race and ethnicity in terms of like who are the, the readings coming from. If we're doing, games, like where are the games coming from? We talk about things like if there's older readings that have problematic content, and like maybe it's a classic in the field, but it's got some racist elements, and there's like discomfort around that, and I bring it up explicitly and say, it's okay to feel uncomfortable, and and I ask them, do you think there's a point where we should stop teaching this text, or is it okay to sort of acknowledge it and then take what we can? And I've found that even just bringing up those things in the classroom, makes people feel more comfortable, and like maybe they're not the only ones who felt that way. And it's also making me more aware of the things that I'm bringing into the classroom, because those are the building blocks that they're using.
I would say these are really good questions. You have to design the community and the culture of your program really intentionally. And it just has to be a constant project. For example, we have a library, which is a large component of our space, and we are constantly slightly changing our policies because we want students to be able to play any game they want, but then there are certain games that kind of take over the space that are sort of like multiplayer fighting games that then become loud, and then that becomes what it looks like the only thing that's happening in the library. So then we have special hours for certain kinds of games, and trying to constantly sort of massage the culture of your program into the space that you want is important. In terms of recruitment, most universities have a ton of recruitment offices and resources, and just make really good friends with those people. The games in general are going to have a big appeal at high school recruitment events and things like that. So in general, they're really going to like being able to talk about games, show projects that your students are doing. And lastly, about inclusivity, we've really tried to, this has also been a huge push for us. I'll give you one data point, is that we instituted scholarships that were trying to identify the kinds of students that we wanted, and we had, through a foundation, a scholarship targeted at non-male students, at women students coming into our program, and that had a huge impact on number of non-male applicants to our program. So actually doing things like that and communicating them can have an impact on bringing in the kinds of people that you want.
Hi, first I just wanted to say thank you for sharing. I'm the games person in an interactive media department in the College of New Jersey, which is a public. And I didn't realize how common it was to be the games person in sort of a lone department, so that's been really affirming to hear that.
You're not alone.
Yeah, I mean, really, it's just been affirming. So my question is sort of related to what we've been talking about, and it's sort of an anti-recruitment question. I came into a program as the games person, and because it's a public school, a lot of the students who are there because they can't afford to go to a private or whatever. Like it's an in-state school, so. My question is sort of how do I talk about the games offering in our program in an honest, kind of realistic way. I experimented with this at our open house events and stuff, but it's still, I feel kind of struggling between wanting to offer a great games program, but also knowing really that it's not enough, our curriculum alone is not enough to prepare students to enter the game industry, which is what a lot of our students want to do.
Well,
So I'm just curious how you kind of wrestle with that.
One of the things that was fantastic about what Game Center, before it was a department, was doing is it actively made a list and kept it current of all the games-related courses all over NYU, and that basically allowed a clever student to cobble together competency, right? I mean, and the industry is huge. Some people need to have deep computational competency, others need to have arts competency. You know, you can also gather resources, like for a while I know there was a careers in game development that was linked to skill sets you need to have out there on the internet. So I think one thing you can do is gather, you know, a comprehensive list of what they could take, gather recommendations from out in the industry about what skills you need, and then just say, hey, you know, I can help you pull together your own curriculum here within the constraints of these majors so that we help you get out there and get a job doing what you want to do. Just one thought.
I would also say entering the game industry doesn't necessarily mean that you're hired as a programmer or a designer right off the bat. We've instituted a new course that used to be sort of an informal lecture series for graduating students, and we've decided that it's key enough that it's a new course called Survival Skills. It meets every week. There's almost no homework. But we want their butts in those seats every week, and we can grade based on attendance, or at least fail them if they don't come. It's a pass-fail course, and all they're doing is a resume, a portfolio, and a career plan in that class. But every week we have different people. We have people from the New York media industry, so from like BuzzFeed or digital production studio. We had last week people that were from the publishing side of the industry, because not developing games. What do you do at a publisher? What kind of jobs are there? So we have people from the art world, the tabletop industry, another week. So we started small, so this has been like a 5-year project to get to the point of a class, but that's a really good way to really connect students and get them to open their eyes that like the only things that there's options beyond getting a job at a AAA studio or becoming your own, you know, indie entrepreneur. Those are too narrow paths, so there's a whole range of other paths as well.
And I would also say, in terms of honesty, I'll be the downer again. I mean, a lot of people that we prepare for the game industry end up leaving the game industry, either because they're tired of it or, I mean, walk around GDC, you know, because of the crunch, because of harassment, you know, because of problems with the culture. And so I don't think, you know, necessarily saying, you know, like, we've trained you perfectly to be this game developer is the right box. It's saying, you know, we've taught you some key skills. Here are some skills that will maybe serve you really well as a game developer, but also they're going to serve you 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the line. Because really, even beyond games, like how many people really stay in the same profession beyond a few weird professors, right? You're going to be moving on, and it's about, you know, like, how are you thinking about your future beyond just like the job you get right after graduation.
And that's true. And we ask all of the guests in this class, like, how did you get? None of them studied games in college. None of them was their first job. They've all gone these incredibly weird career paths. So that's a really important message as well.
Well, that's excellent. I have a strange career path. My experience is actually, I started teaching in nonprofit game development. Now then I went to the college level, so a lot of your experiences are very similar to what I've had, but then my experience where I am now is I actually teach at a public high school, creating a game development program for 14, 15, and 16-year-olds. So my question would be, when you have students that their experience is, I like games, but I don't know where to start, which is where a lot of my students are, where is that first critical step, do you think, to get them on this path? I'm in the process of converting a program over from being majority art to one that is design and programming focused. I've used actually some of Eric's work that I've pulled from the web, so thank you very much for that. And actually, Catherine, I've used some of your work as well, which is interesting to work with 14 and 15 and 16-year-olds. So yeah, where do you start with some students where their experience is, I like games, but I don't know where to start?
When you say going down that path, what's the path? Is the path just incorporating games into their education? Is it getting them into a college game-related degree
So we are a
program?
4-year program at a magnet school in Florida. And Florida actually has state guidelines for teaching animation gaming simulation, is what they call the official program. It's very not what I would consider where I would have my students start as based on my experience with design and that kind of thing. So I sort of fudge my way through the state guidelines, which is an interesting path. So I guess that's sort of the place to start. Kids come in thinking that, oh, it's all art. And so you have a lot of kids that love to draw and love to build things, but don't really know where to go with that. Then I have some students that are like, I love games, and I just want to know how they're made and stuff. So like the first 2 years of our program are very exploratory, where the last 2 years of our program are really focused on how do I get a student ready for post-secondary opportunities. We have Ringling College of Art and Design right in town, so we partnered with them to sort of help get us that direction. But sort of where is that path over 4 years? Do we start them with design? Do we start them with art? Do we start them with some type of programming skills? I teach them Unity and Unreal over the course of those 4 years to get them ready, and we also do AR and VR. So it's one of those, where in your opinion is the path?
That feels like a really complex question that we can't address in 3 minutes. Does anybody have like one thought to share about this?
I mean, it sounds like you're doing the right kind of thinking. It's, you know, you need to leverage your resources that you have available. In the end, applying to a program like ours, the most important thing ends up being a portfolio.
Yes.
What is a student's portfolio? And it can be anything. It doesn't have to be a game. It doesn't even have to be a digital game. It could be a card game or board game.
An
It's just-
opera.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that emphasizing design ends up helping is because design is one way of thinking about design is that it's about communication. So a student can make a wonderful game. Maybe it's technically impressive, but if they can't put together a good video, if they can't talk about it well, if they can't explain what it is, may not help them get into a program. So, but it seems like you're. I
Yeah.
mean, it seems like you're doing the right stuff. And
Do you want to add anything? So we've got a lot more questions. Lucky for us, the speaker room is basically a large, well-lit corridor just right outside of here. So
really,
we'll be
it's
happy
not
to
these
hang out with you
interrogation
all.
spotlights
And
anymore.
thank you so much for your attention. Hopefully some of this was useful to you, and have a fabulous GDC.